Hi, this is Tim with Byrd Appliance. Today we're looking at a roper dryer, the old mechanical style with the spinning mechanical timer. This could also be a Kenmore, a Whirlpool, Admiral, a Mana, anything made by Whirlpool. And what we're looking at today is a dryer with no power at all. We're going to walk through, about 3 or 4 or 5 of the most common things that cause a dryer not to start at all. Alright, so the tools you're going to need, if you have a multimeter, that's going to be really helpful. You're going to need a multimeter for a few of these things. You're going to need some kind of paint scraper or spatula, Phillips head, 1/4 inch, and a 5/16 nut driver. Alright, so let's start first by seeing if we have any power to the machine. On electric dryers, there's 2 types of outlets. There's either a 3-prong or a 4-prong. The way you're going to look at the 3-prong is there's 2 lines of voltage, each carrying around 110 volts, and then a neutral. The 2 hots on the 3-prong are down here, and this L shape is your neutral. So I'll try to do this with 2 hands. Anyway, here's where your 240 would show up. And we've got 240 here, anywhere from 220 to 245. And then here you're going to find 110 to 120 on each side, right here and here. That's all you need to know about that. On the 4-prong, they've added a ground. So if you see this style, it's very similar to the 3. The 2 on the sides are where you're going to look for the 240, which we have. There's your neutral. You want 120, 110 to 120, and 110 to 120. And then a ground. If everything looks good there, if you have 240, then we need to go ahead and look at the machine. Alright, the first thing you want to check is the door switch. That's going to prevent the machine from turning on at all. And you'll find it somewhere up here typically, and here on this one it's right here. Just push it in. If you hear the clicking noise, it's probably okay. We're going to show you how to check that with a multimeter. So the first thing you need to do is get this lid off. Now we've already opened our lid, but we're going to show you what you need to do to get that done. First, take your lid trap out. Take these 2 screws off, and then what you need is your spatula, and you're going to see these 2, there's going to be something like this on each one, these little catches. You're just going to have to press one in on each side, and it will allow this to release the top. So now we've got inside the top, and we're going to look for the lid switch, which is over here. And here you see the wiring for it. Remember, this machine is unplugged now. It is unplugged. And this is a little difficult to get off. We sometimes use a small flathead screwdriver, and you got to pry the plastic bit underneath out while you're putting some pressure on it. There's one on each side. And then it slides out. Now, what you're going to do here is when the door is closed, it should have continuity, meaning electricity will pass. The line is closed. You're going to set your multimeter to ohms and check to make sure that this line is closed, which will show 0 or something close to 0 ohms. And in this case we have a closed circuit, so that shows us that most likely this switch is good. Alright, there's 2 ways to get inside this dryer. Top, if you're going to go in here and look around. Number 1, sometimes you have to lift this back and slide a spatula underneath here and there'll be a metal catch. But first what you want to do is look in the back and see if there are any screws. If there are screws back here, that's how you're going to get inside of it. So we're going to go ahead and release these screws and release the top so you can see what's going on inside here. Alright, we're looking inside this area. This is the start switch, the button that you saw in the front that you push to start your machine. This is a momentary switch that will send voltage down to the the start winding on your motor. The way you test that is always, if you're doing an ohms test, you want to isolate the piece you're going to test. So we're going to pull one of these off. It should be open when it's not depressed. And it is. I'm going to use the base to push it down and see if it works. You hear the beeping noise, that means it's working fine. So this is a working start switch. Alright, now we're going to look into the back of the dryer. This is another thing that will cause it not to start. Alright, now we're looking at the back. On the back here there's a lot of wiring going on. The only thing you really need to check for a dryer that is not starting will be this fuse here. This is called a thermal fuse. When it gets too hot, this will blow. So this is heat sensitive. It's designed to prevent your dryer from catching on fire. So again, we're going to remove one. We're going to check it. And we have continuity here. If this were blown out, what we typically do on this is that means that there was some heat probably behind the dryer. You need to make sure that your ductwork is clear or this will continue to blow. This is protecting usually heat coming from the exterior or a blocked line. When we replace this, we also typically will replace the cycling thermostat that is down here. This one's supposed to open and close at certain temperatures, so it will be closed until it gets too hot and then it opens. It may be faulty and it has a lower temperature when it opens than this melts, meaning that this could be closed, kind of broken, and it's not allowing it to open and the heat's too much and it melts this. So we typically replace these in pairs. But right now this is working, so we're going to continue to move on. Alright, the next one's getting a little trickier. Remember that your machine is off. This is the timer. Obviously this is part of running the machine, and there's a bunch of switches inside here. As the timer spins, it turns on and off switches, so you need to know which wires run to the motor. And in this case, if you can't read a wiring diagram, you could have a different timer, so this becomes a little more difficult. But there's only two components really left on here that could be a problem. It's either this timer or the motor. And on this one, on this timer, it's actually going to run between these 2 points, C and B, down to this motor. I know this is complicated, so again, this may be out of your league. Start with the first three that we showed you. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and test this to see if the motor's okay. So first you got to turn your motor to some position where the dryer would be on. And in this case we want to test C and B. So we'll pull this piece out. C and B are these two. This should be closed, meaning the switch is closed, allowing voltage to go down to the motor. And the switch is not closed, so in this case we have a problem with the timer. So there's the timer. Now the final one to think about is if this checks out, there's nothing else left on the machine. Alright, so just to recap, the things that keep the dryer from starting completely, you're not going to hear anything turning, nothing working. Lid switch could be an issue. Your start switch, if that's not working, you need to test it the way we showed you. Your thermal fuse, the timer, and then ultimately the last thing in there is the motor. And so to prevent you from having to do any live testing or anything like that, you can assume that if all of these connections are closed when you test them, then the problem is the voltage is getting to the motor and the motor's burned out. But this should give you a good idea of what's going on. The final thing that's not on this dryer, that's sometimes on the newer ones that look like this, as they've gotten newer, they've added a switch for the belt. So if you see the belt has jumped off of your dryer, they want to prevent that from overheating as well, so the whole system shuts down as well, because if the barrel's not spinning, they don't want the heat going on in there. They shut down the machine. So you'll sometimes find a switch near an idler pulley on the inside, but it's not on this one, so we're not going to show you. Anyway, that's how you would diagnose a Kenmore, Roper, Whirlpool, anything with this mechanical timer for not starting at all. Thanks again, this is Tim with Byrd Appliance.